Go across now to Jahangir, AZIZ, Chief Economist at JP Morgan. Jahangir, appreciate you joining us here on the show. What do you make of the government's expenditure review framework, largely sticking to the plan and the targets as far as the fiscal deficit are concerned? A big initiative there to try and squeeze on the expenditure front. But of course, with an eye on 2019, social sector schemes getting enhanced allocations.
Look, it's obviously welcome news that the government has decided to stick to its consolidation plan. We need to recall that this consolidation plan is about 3 years behind schedule, given the fact that we were supposed to have reached this target by now from the original plan that we had. Now, obviously, things change and government needs to adapt to it. But I would say that I'm less worried about what the central government does, but far more worried about what the state government does. And we've been flagging this issue for almost a year now, that all of the consolidation that the central government has achieved has more or less been completely offset by profligacy on the part of the state government. And we don't really see what is it that the government is planning to do to bring state government finances under control. So that's basically where the concern lies, not so much on the central government front, but on the state government front.
Sure. As you rightly pointed out, Jahangir, we're seeing state governments now breach even their threshold targets on account of whether it's the farm loan waivers or the Uday scheme. So in terms of, central plus state consolidated debt, what kind of number would you be factoring in?
So we have been looking at this for, at least for the last 3-4 years, that it sort of has got stuck around between 7 and 7.25% of GDP. So while there has been consolidation on the part of the central government, as far as the overall overall fiscal deficit of the country is concerned, that's remained around 7.25% of GDP, which, given the fact that, if you go by official statistics of growth rates around 7 and 8%, that's a very high fiscal deficit to maintain when the growth is already at 7 and 8%. Or if you want to think about it differently, if at 7 and 8% growth rate, we are stuck at 7.25% of GDP of fiscal deficit, what is it that we really need to do in order to bring that down to more reasonable levels? I mean, growth really has to now look at double digits before we can bring that fiscal consolidation part back to the fiscal consolidation part. So that's the concern.
Another concern, Jahangir, is the fact that we continue to be seeing a depressed investment cycle. And while, again, the government reiterating its position on trying to push government capex, the fact of the matter is, and I'm just looking at a report that's just been put out, incremental credit growth has contracted at 1.5 lakh crores. So how, from an investment cycle perspective, what's the outlook?
So again, this has been a problem for quite some time, and it's not just the last 3 years. We've been in a down cycle on private investment since around 2011-12. That has been, by the way, the case in the rest of the world too. Only now do we see some improvement in investment taking place in the developed markets. We haven't yet seen any pickup in the investment cycle in the rest of the emerging markets. So India is not alone on that. What I do find problematic is this artificial difference that people tend to bring about between capital expenditure versus non-capital expenditure, and that all capital expenditure is a good thing and all non-capital expenditures are a bad thing. In fact, if you look at international evidence, government's role is to provide a lot of services that has nothing to do with capital expenditure, that has nothing to do with infrastructure. Right. And if the government does not provide those services, then growth will falter regardless how much capital expenditure the government does make.
Okay. A quick final question, Jahangir, before I let you go. The Reserve Bank has put out its dividend number, and it's much lower than what was estimated and also much lower in comparison to the previous year's payouts, coming in at a little over 30,000 crores versus the estimate of 58,000 crores. A, what do you make of that number? And B, we've got the economic survey being tabled in Parliament tomorrow. What would you be watching out for?
So on the first, I think that shouldn't be surprising, given the fact that the cash flow should be lower for the Reserve Bank of India, given the fact that for at least half the year, they had to reverse repo a very large amount of liquidity that came into the system. So that's the cost they need to pay. And on the fiscal front, on the economic survey front, again, I've been looking for this for quite some time. I still haven't seen it. I think there is a need for India to acknowledge the fact that the global economy has changed. Globalization that used to drive economies in the past is no longer going to be a driver of growth. And in a world where globalization isn't going to be the driver of growth, what is it that India, like other emerging markets, need to do to find new engines of growth? And again, that's not something that I've seen in the last 3 years. I'm hoping it will come out in the economic survey, but I have to wait and see.
Yeah. All right, Jahangir, we'll check in with you tomorrow, but appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Jahangir Aziz, the Chief Economist at JP Morgan. Time